This is the Family Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air with Leanne Linsky for the first time. Welcome to the Family Electric Ghost podcast.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing
Well, thank
great.
you for
Thank
being
you.
on the show. And yeah, it's always good to be talking to people. We're actually in New Hampshire. So we're in the lovely state of New Hampshire with all the pines in the middle of the woods. But we get to reach out and talk to people around the world. And I want to let people know that we are a featured podcast on Newsly. You can see that icon on the top. That's another podcast platform that's an audio only. And so if you use that coupon code GHOST, you can check that out for free and see if you like it. It's just another podcast platform you might not know about, but we are featured on there. And later tonight, we'll have the audio version of this podcast there. Now, the other thing, well, let people know we are at episode 1005 of the Family Electric Ghost podcast. Thank you. And that's the tracking on Apple Podcasts since 2016. And today we're going to be talking to the CEO and founder of Plauzzable. And we're going to talk to you're a comedian turned entrepreneur. You founded this online comedy club, which is really interesting to me because I've dabbled in online music festivals. I did two back in 2021 and 2022. I haven't done one this year yet. But yeah, I think it's a really cool idea to be able to have a comedy club. So maybe we can dive into that and maybe give your background for the audience first.
Sure. So a little bit of background is I actually started out in regular business. I was working for a Fortune 500 company, and a coworker suggested that I take a comedy class. And so I did. I took a comedy writing class, and from there I signed up for an improv class, and it just snowballed into this thing. And so after I'd been at this regular job for almost 13 years, I was laid off. And my theater friends were like, "Hey, you said if you didn't have that job, you would move to New York and pursue comedy." And I was like, "Oh, someone heard me and now they're calling me out." So I, I was like, let me, my friend was like, "Hey, I have a place in New York. Do you want to share it with me?" And I was like, "Oh, let me think about it." He goes, "You have 1 hour." I was like, 1 hour. So I thought, okay, yeah, I'm in, and I packed 2 suitcases and moved across country from Las Vegas to New York City, and, um, and started, pursuing comedy full time. I'd already been studying it for like 5 years, and so I went all in, and then I stayed in New York, and I produced shows and open mics for nearly 9 years while I was there, and then I moved to the West Coast, to LA, Long Beach, specifically, and I started producing shows there. But I found I spent so much time on the freeway, more than any stage. I was like, "This is bananas. How do I bridge the gap between in-person shows and real time?" Working things out. So I this is before COVID, by the way, and so was
Mhm.
like, when I first moved to California, I was like, "I should do some things on Skype." Remember Skype? And then,
Yeah.
anyway, I ended up doing things on Zoom, and I started doing things on Zoom, and then COVID happened, and everybody started doing things on Zoom. But the existing technologies are great, but there were some specific things that we really need for entertainment, like no audio delays or cutouts, and maybe a different screen layout, and then we need a way to promote ourselves and help each other out and build a community. And so I
Mhm.
ended up creating Plauzzable, and I went back to school, got my master's in innovation and entrepreneurship, and built a network of people that I could get mentors and, resources. And we built this platform, Plauzzable, which is, like you said, it's an online comedy club. So it's kind of like, anybody can join. We're in beta. Everything is there available for free. You can create a free account as a fan, and you can log in, and all the shows are live in real time like this is. But
Oh, wow.
like, you can see and hear the audience, and they can see and hear you. And you can see and hear all the laughter
Oh,
in
wow.
real
That's cool.
time so that yeah. So you as a musician, you understand, like, the importance of those kind of things as you're performing. Like,
Yeah.
even nonverbal feedback is so important to us. So I ended up creating this platform so that, there's no gatekeeper. I don't audition people. I don't manage people or hire the comedians, they can go on and create an account and then produce and write and put up their own shows as they see fit. And they could
Oh,
put them
wow.
up for free, or if they want to charge ticket price, they can earn money by charging ticket prices. And fans, if they want to see that comedian, they can pay a price.
Is it
So
live
that's
or do
kind
they
of how
pre-record? Do they see on your
live.
platform on Plauzzable, it's live, so they don't pre-record and put up, they have to do it live, and then they have a you have a ability for, like, so if there's, like, 50 people or 100 people in the audience, how does that audience, like, clapping or feedback, how do you deal with that? How do you get that to be in the background?
Yeah. So our technology that we built into this is there's no audio delay or anything. You can hear everybody. So like, when you stand in a room full of people and you can kind of hear all the noise and the people
Yeah.
around,
Yeah, yeah.
you aren't cut out. Your audio is not cut out as the primary speaker. So it's like that. So
Oh,
people good thing is during COVID is people kind of learned, like, when someone's talking, I quiet down. Same as being in a live theater when
but in real
someone's
audience, you have to wait for them
afraid.
to quiet down.
Yeah, and so, it's like that, but there's no on some of these things where if I talk and then you cough or you sneeze or you talk, then all of a sudden my microphone cuts out. On Plauzzable, that doesn't happen.
That
There's no
doesn't. Oh,
cutouts.
that's cool.
It's like aggregate volume, which is really nice and super important because timing is everything in telling a joke. So if I tell a joke, I don't have to wait 2 seconds for the punchline, or if I find myself waiting on Plauzzable, then I know nobody's laughing because there's no delay.
Wow.
Um,
Can
yeah,
you
so that's really
control
cool.
that
And also,
the loud. Yeah, just a question
um,
technically, because like, I'm very interested because a lot of musicians could benefit from that audience feedback
yeah,
capability. I'm just wondering, like, is there a way to control the volume of that audience? So there's a certain level of
yeah,
that volume?
that is something that we're working on, that we can control it, and, that'll be in a future phase, but
Oh,
yeah,
that's
because
cool.
that is important so that we can kind of take them as a whole and bring that down if we need to. So that's definitely in future. And right now, and the if someone has their volume turned really up high on their mic, they might come in a little bit hot from an audience, but typically it's not yet been an
Mm,
issue. Yeah. So
kind
yeah,
of an
to your
issue.
point, that's super important, and that is something we're looking at. And then the other thing is like the screen layout is different. So like in this example, like what we're looking at, you and I, sorry for the people who are listening to audio only, but we're side by
Yeah,
side.
yeah,
But,
yeah.
if you for instance, if you were on Plauzzable, we would be stacked one on top of the other, like, and real large and dominant on the left-hand side, and we'd be anchored there, and then the audience appears and they populate the right-hand side, so you can see a bunch of them, but we always
Oh,
stay
wow.
stationary on the left, and if you wanna see more of the audience, you just use your mouse wheel and scroll, and they'll
Right.
carousel up and down,
Oh, so you can
right?
see the entire audience, like everybody that's there?
So, yeah, they'll scroll through, but you as a performer stay anchored on the left because after all, people are there to see you
Oh,
perform,
you
and
stay
if you
anchored, okay.
'cause you yeah, if you go into gallery view, like on Zoom, if I go on gallery
Mhm.
view, I am looking at everybody's houses. I am checking y'all out, like, I'm not gonna lie, like,
Mhm.
I find it fascinating, like, what's everybody doing that during this time? Because I just have that kind of short attention span. So when
Yeah.
when I go to see someone perform, if I'm sitting in a live audience, I don't turn around and look around throughout the entire theater as to what everybody else is doing while the comedian's on stage.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
focus on the comedian.
yeah.
So we basically set up the design so that it's that our focus is always the performer, yet we can still see some of the audience around us. And it's also important because when people laugh, we're more likely to laugh if we see and hear other people laughing. And that's the benefit of having it in real time is because we laugh
That's
more
interesting.
when we're doing it with other people.
Do you encourage the artist, as a comedian, a lot of times comedians, you wanna see their entire body because some comedians, like, they do a lot with their like an actor, they use their whole body to put together a performance, or do you kinda deal with it like the way we are as a talking head? So, a question is, did you encourage people to actually have like a very like a long view, they would see them like as if they were on stage, or do they do it like the way we're doing it?
Um, Pretty much for the most part, everybody's doing it the way we're doing it. There are some comedians who will stand up and they'll step back a bit and they'll use a handheld microphone so that it's more traditional stand up looking. And then the background people have different backgrounds. Like some people do have the brick walls and stuff, which is really cool. Um,
Mhm.
but like me, I don't want everybody to see my body post COVID. So it's better.
Yeah, yeah, so
Uh,
it's not like
but,
you
but,
don't want that.
right? But it is interesting because, at first, when we first kinda transitioned into this kind of, you know, medium for people to use, everybody's like, "Well, it's not a stage," but when you talk to comedians, it's kind of interesting because a lot of comedians aspire to be on TV, and I'm like, "Well, when you get on TV, you're in
Yeah,
a
it's not a
you're in a
stage,
box."
you're in a box. Yeah, in
Right.
a box.
So, you can kind of like, why not start
Adjust.
honing those skills of being
Yeah,
on camera and that kind of frame on you. It's a skill set to have, and even if you're doing
yeah,
commercial
it's a
work or
different.
anything.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
totally different because it's kinda like when you're a band, like when we're bands and we're doing live performances. I've done like big bedroom producer concerts, and we've had, like the singer songwriters will kind of they go a little step back so you could see them with their guitar. But if you're a
yep,
full band, they tend to go a little bit further back so you see the entire band because that's the nature of being a musician. People want to see you actually playing the instrument. If you're just
mhm,
singing like a DJ or a rapper, you could be in this kind of view. But when you're doing the performance and you've got like a 3, 4, 5 person band and you kind of zoom out, but that
yeah,
yeah, it's interesting, and they had to figure out the biggest problem I had with musicians is the feedback loop, and that's why I'm very interested in the fact that you have that feedback because a lot of bands, especially rock bands, like 4 piece, 5 piece
mhm,
rock bands, the drummers are like, I can't feel the audience, so I'm not really getting it." Because the
yes,
musicians really pick up on the audience, and if they can't
yes,
they just then they have to figure out, "Well, I just have to get into a zone and be happy with my performance and not realize I'm not getting anything." And just kind of get into a zone. And they found ways during COVID to do it, but it still is very interesting what you've mentioned, that the fact that you got that feedback loop. I'm very intrigued by that.
yeah, it's been a really interesting journey. I completely hear you as all those situations you described and how, because I was doing the same thing. I was during COVID especially, and even before then when I was on there, I was really paying attention to, like, how people behaved differently, and then when COVID happened and suddenly everybody went online, a friend of mine runs a nonprofit, and we did a big fundraiser because we were scheduled to do a fundraiser in person, and then everything shut down. So within a matter of 2 weeks, we put everything online and we put it on. I didn't have Plauzzable yet, but we put it on Zoom, and
Mhm.
we had singers and performers from Broadway and bands from California and, like, all the things, and we did, like, a 6-hour marathon of talent, like, different guests coming on to do this
Yeah,
fundraiser
yeah,
for it.
yeah.
It was so cool. But we did rehearsals with everybody the week prior to, like, make sure
Yeah.
everybody knew how to get on
Sound
Zoom because
checks.
not
Yeah,
everybody had been on
yeah,
Zoom.
sound checks.
It was fascinating because we had this band, really good band, and they were like, "Well, maybe we can be in the same place. Maybe we can't." We went through this whole thing, to your point, of how do they get the vibe and the energy going? And it
Yeah,
is, it's so important, and I
it's
don't think
difficult
that
sometimes.
it is, and I don't think that online will ever replicate in person, and I just was reading an
Yeah,
article the other day
yeah,
about the
exactly.
science behind that, and they had this article where an I wanna say a neuroscientist, I may be wrong, but I keep meaning to look this article back up because I wanna write it down, but basically they did a study and they watched what happens in people's brains when they interacted and socialized online, versus when they were in person, and different parts of the brain and more things are firing up in the brain when you're in person versus online. So there is a science behind it, and
Yeah,
but I do think that we can do better online. I don't know that it'll ever be
yeah.
perfect, but I definitely think there's room for improvement.
Yeah, can I actually what I've been doing even before the pandemic, I used to do shows in Boston and New York and go to clubs.
Mhm.
But then I started saying, well, I started doing podcasting and I couldn't travel as much. So I started doing these Facebook and YouTube events live from my studio.
Mhm.
And behind me I have all my synthesizers and being a one person kind of band, um, I, I
Yeah.
use a lot of analog modular synths. So I have always been like a one person kind of show, kind of like I kind of grew up with Todd Rundgren and Prince, and this idea that you could be this one person that can create all this music, and that in
Mhm.
itself keeps me so involved in my music. I kind of get in a trance and it gets me into this zone. And then when I play live, it kind of gives this like okay, you get into this flow state, this stream of
Yep.
consciousness, and it's like if you're the type of artist that has like very set song structures, you kind of depend on the crowd. But if you're an artist that is very into like fusion, jamming, stream of consciousness, that in itself can make the performance work online. And I've been doing that before the pandemic. And I found other artists
Okay.
that kind of go with this flow state thing where they're kind of doing it like just off the cuff improvisation. Then that lended itself to this kind of thing where then you get an audience is like, wow, he's doing something different every night, different every moment, and that's how you can succeed in it. Depending like where other people are waiting for that feedback, you're kind of in that muse state, so it doesn't actually
Yeah.
apply the same way. You
That's
understand?
very cool. Yeah, and it makes sense because when you're in that flow state, that changes everything. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
I understand what you mean because like when I was doing a lot of improv and everything and being on stage, we're so in the moment and paying attention to what's happening in that scene right now. Like everything shuts off, like same with doing a set of comedy, like getting if once you get into that groove and you get going in your set and things are cooking along, you're like in a whole it takes you to a whole nother place,
Other
which is
place. Yeah.
so
It's
cool.
a different
Yeah.
type of scene. It's like you're creating a stage that gives you a different format, right? So then
Yeah.
once people start to own the format, like once they get on, they say, "Oh, this is what I can do with this platform." So if you're an artist and say, "Well, I have," and what I found a lot of times is artists like limitations when you're an artist can breed really interesting results. So the
Mhm.
limitation of not having a crowd, but then thinking, well, I can do something like that's like a soliloquy or like a one act play, or kind of really get into this thing where I can shape it, and then I won't get distracted. So I could be really intricate in my performance and not think about the negative of it. Oh, I don't have the crowd. So if you like you keep on putting in your head, I don't have the crowd, I don't have the crowd, that's a negative
Yeah.
thought, right? Then you're gonna like you're limiting. You say, what could I do if I don't have the crowd? What could I do if I do something if it's not the same as the in-person experience? Is there something else I could do? And then there's
Yeah.
ways I can be creative with that space.
See, I love that. I'm all about like that's I really appreciate hearing all of those things because that's the kind of things that like I think about. I'm like, I wonder what people even in creating the platform of Plauzzable, it's like, okay, well, we solve some of these problems, but now I'm curious to see what someone like yourself would come on there and do and like come up with that I haven't thought about yet. What's the next thing that someone's going to be like, oh, I can use this space as my performance space for XYZ. It's like take something to a whole new level. So I'm
Yeah.
always fascinated by when artists have ideas of like, "Oh, I can do." Yeah, like don't, go for it, do it. Like I'm even excited to see people doing their podcast on there because now they're hosting with live audience and it
Yeah,
changes
that's a
the
cool
energy
idea.
or vibe of the room.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's a
so
really cool idea. I mean, 'cause like the what I do with my bedroom producer festival, one thing that a lot of bands I did 2 years in a row was they kept on complaining they didn't have the feedback. So it's like,
yeah.
"Oh, well, if I ever did it again," it's like, "Man, your platform sounds like a better way to do it." And we had guys that were using, like, OBS, and, I use it myself where I'd have, like, multiple screenshots of my setup. So, like, I have, like, one screen down so you can see my hands on the keyboard, a wide view, and then another view, so at a different angle so you can see I'm a one-person band, but you see me look at all my boards and, like, different camera angles, and if you get more advanced, you can have your OBS kind of popping, rotating through the cameras. So if you have like 3
Oh,
webcams,
yeah.
they can be rotating, they can be triggered based on certain things. You can code them to like, okay, if I start playing on the board, I'm doing a solo, then it's going to go right to that. And so there's a lot of stuff you can do, and you can make things look interesting. That why would somebody want to go watch that? That's the whole thing. Is like, how
Yeah.
can you make the online experience, concert, something that
Yeah.
somebody want to get a ticket to go see? You know,
I
because you're doing
I
something interesting or
agree.
something different.
Yep, and I love that you use OBS. I use OBS also. It's, friendly with so many platforms, and I do agree, like, it completely, like, up levels your production value and things, you
Yeah,
know? And so
totally. You
it's
can
really
do a lot of
fun.
cool stuff. Yeah, because you can hook your DAW up to it. And I was having a lot of bands trying to figure out, like, well, how could I run my backing tracks and play live? Well, if you use OBS, you can connect it to your DAW and then use that
Yep.
like you would if you were on a concert. Like a lot of bands today, they have their digital audio workstation connected to the mixer board, and they're playing their leads live, or they're playing, but they have maybe pre-recorded vocals they're running off their DAW, but they're singing some parts of the song they unmute and they sing live. And I was kind of pointing
Right.
out to people, like, if you want to have, you can do that level of performance online. If you connect
Mhm.
your Ableton or whatever, you can do it, but you have to show up for the sound check to show me that you actually did it right.
This is
Because like
so true. Okay. Yes, PSA for everybody, show up early, like, do yourself and everybody a favor, it's like, show up early, make sure everything works properly, because inevitably, like Murphy's Law, the minute you don't do that, something will
yeah,
go wrong,
yeah,
and
I can't hear your
technical.
mic. Like, I don't hear your backing tracks. I don't hear anything. I see you playing, and I don't hear anything. So I had to that when I did my bedroom producer festival, I had like 22 bands over 3 days.
Wow.
And I had to sound check every band before. And
Yep.
I had a couple of days before I sound checked a lot of the bands. And then I had people who were straggling in same day. And I'm like, you're really pushing it. Because, I
So
got
true.
I had bands from like South Africa and Australia. I got to get up at 2 in the morning to sound check them. And I'm like, really, guys? Like, you got to understand, like, this is going to be live. So we do need a sound check. Like, take it like you're going to a club, like you're really in
Yes.
the venue. It's the same thing.
Yep.
I gotta sound check what you're doing because it's gonna come out at that
I
moment. So
agree. I agree. And this and it's interesting. So the other thing on the flip side, I think audience members should remember and apply that same thing. Like, don't be scared to show up early, and otherwise you miss the first 15 minutes of any act, right? Because you're like,
yeah, yeah,
wait, where's the website? Wait, how do I connect it to my speaker? What, and then you
yeah,
disrupt
yeah,
everything that's happening in the live show. And yeah, it's just all you gotta do is just set your alarm a few minutes earlier, log in, make sure your headset, all that stuff. Because, and even going from platform to platform, by doing so, sometimes you have to reset your settings. And
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah. We
I
had this, yeah, we all kinds of things. We're dealing with people's DAWs, differences between Pro Tools and there's so many different digital capabilities that artists have. So one artist has Pro Tools, one of them has Ableton, one has X, whatever, and they all work different. And trying to connect it to this platform, you could go through OBS, but if they didn't have the right plugin, they didn't do the right thing, then it wouldn't work. It's like, and so it's like, you guys, like, we really got to take it serious, and it's just not going to be, and some people decided to, like, I'm just do unplugged. I'm just going to hook up a mic and have a guitar and keep it simple. I said, well, yeah, you got to make a decision. Like, if you can't get it to work, then what's your alternative? I still want you. Why don't you do an unplugged thing? And you just jump on a bunch of acoustic guitars and somebody like drumming on a cardboard box or whatever. That's still cool. It could
yeah,
still be very intimate. Like, if you guys, some of the bands that decided to do that, it actually was really good because it's something they
mhm,
normally didn't do. And then people got to see
right,
something online that they didn't do. And that's where I think, like, we have an online platform and you can provide people with something that maybe they didn't expect. And so then you can, that's the reason why people would want to watch it, because then they could get into it, in a different way.
Yeah. And you also hit on, I think, a really important point about, of like try something new. And I always encourage, like, when comedians come on Plauzzable, if like, you know what, don't come on just for a show at the last minute, but go explore, experiment, host your own, play with the buttons, see what this does. What does this do? Can this, oh, I could do something completely different that's even better. Like, don't be afraid to play in it. I think oftentimes, and especially as we get older, we're like, oh, it just has to be this way. And I follow these instructions and I check the box. But there's a whole element of, with the technology, an opportunity to play and experiment and have a plan before you actually go to your performance. So I love that you touched on, like, you know, okay, if it doesn't work, are you going to be able to play acoustically? Like, yeah, do that. Like, but yeah, get on
Yeah.
there and try these things out in advance too on your own, like for fun, you know?
Yeah, we had some guy that figured out, like, couldn't get their DAW to work, and then, okay, I'm gonna run my song on SoundCloud and run it through on the StreamYard channel, and then kind of not lip sync, but kind of do karaoke's over pull my vocal track out. And so I said, why don't you just record all your non-vocal tracks to SoundCloud and then run that and then sing live on your mic against that. But you're gonna probably have to practice, right, to get it synced up.
Yeah.
But yeah, then they were able to, oh yeah, I found a way to get kind of a hack to not have to use my DAW.
Mhm.
And I had a bunch of bands that figured that out. And it's like, yeah, it's a quick dirty hack. They gotta kind of just like jury rig it. But you gotta like kind of think like off the cuff, like what could you do to still perform? And then you were able to still do it. So you kind of get that creative, like, it's like, how could I actually present this? Like, if, like you said, if somebody's used to having a full body stage experience, and then they ask, well, how do I do it if I'm in a box? How am I going to
Yeah.
do this performance? Kind of maybe I have to rewrite my skit to kind of focus
Mhm.
in a different way, maybe more with my hands,
Yeah.
more with my eyes and my face, and like, because now you can close up, so maybe people couldn't see your face. Then it's like, oh, like an actor is like, what do actors do? They spend a lot of time with what they do with their eyes, what they do with their mouth. They're like, how their face is. So maybe now you can use some of those actor capabilities, because now we can focus on your face more than the rest of your whole body, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think it's I I love all of this stuff, and you sound very similar. Like, you love to play and see what's possible, and it's not a matter of, "Oh, this is hard, I can't do it." It's like, "Oh, a new challenge. This means opportunity. Like, what, let me unbox this. Let me dig in and kind of get dirty with it all, you know?" And I admire that, and I'm a big fan. That's how I ended up creating what I created, and I think it's fun, like, when you go into a new venue and you're on a new stage, like, you show up and you're like, you kind of map it out, because I remember my friend and I did a two-person show at a place and we almost fell off the stage. We found a hole. We didn't realize at first there was a hole in the back of it.
There's a hole in the
But
back.
it
Oh
was
wow.
so amazing. Yeah,
It's
we
good to
played in
walk
class
around.
anyway. Yeah,
It's good to
classy
walk
place.
around to make sure.
But it's really important, right? Because you never know. Even if you've been there before, because we had been there before and the hole wasn't there before. But, you
Yeah.
kinda wanna map things out. But I think it's also exciting because
Oh
it's like,
geez.
oh, sometimes they put in something new that you didn't know was there, and you're like, "I can totally do something cool and fun with this." And it just changes the whole vibe of your show or in an
Yeah.
experience because,
Yeah, I
truly.
remember I went to this club in New York, and they had Marshall amps, and the previous club didn't have really good amps. And so I had some of my own. And I said, well, I don't need to use my own here, because they had a big Marshall stack. And then I was talking to the sound guys, and they're like, oh, guess what we got? We got smoke machines, like heavy metal smoke machines. And I was like, ooh, we're gonna use that. And because I came
Right?
early,
Yeah.
I was able to talk to the guy running the board and then work out some cues for him to do the smoke machine. But if I had not shown up early, I wouldn't have been able to use it, because they wouldn't have been able to kind of pre-cue the guy and say, hey, do this when I do this sign, when I do this, can you do that? And he said, yeah, I'll write it down. And he was professional. He knew what to do because he was working with bands forever. So I said, well, I'll give you a sign when I want you to do it. And he's like, cool. And so we just because sometimes being prepared and just being like, I think it's just being professional to understand that, like, showing up early if you're an artist, that you get the
Yeah,
lay of the club, you hear the acoustics, you hear what the sound system's going to sound like, you hear what the mics are like. You start to say, okay, here's what I can do here, here's what I can't do here, and then at least you don't find that out right at the moment you go on.
right? Yeah, in front of like 100 people. Like, oh, that didn't work. Yeah, I agree. And there's a saying 80% of success is showing up. And I think another 10% of that is showing up early because
Yeah, yeah,
it does make a
run through
difference.
it. Run through it and get yourself comfortable, because like every club I would go to, like, I'd end up being there an hour early, and again, I had a big setup, I had
Yeah,
roadies and stuff, and we were, like, setting up all my stuff, and it's just, like, I need to understand what that place is gonna sound like, and I run through, like, a couple of songs just to get the whole band into it, and it's just kinda, to me, it's just I didn't wanna be, like, just thinking everything's gonna go wrong, but I wanna make sure I had backups for things that if it didn't work, then I use this instead. Like, if somehow something
yeah,
wasn't working, then I could do something else. And it's good to find that out like a half hour before. You know,
yeah. I
but,
mean, no, it's really smart. And I think like hearing you as a musician, you have equipment and everything. And for so many comedians, they just show up and someone else, a microphone and a stand is magically there for them. And they have that luxury, right? We have that luxury of not having to haul around equipment. And I think that's where there's a opportunity for comedians because as things move online more and more, like they
yeah,
realize, "Oh, I'm responsible for my own equipment." There's still a learning curve to be had, but I see the
yeah,
difference between musicians versus, comedians. Comedians are like, "Why doesn't this work?" Like somebody,
yeah, because we
anybody.
were
And it's like, yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
You
because
know, you're
you might wanna have the brick wall, like you mentioned, like the brick wall background, or you might wanna use some new tools to be able to throw in things. Like throw in
yeah.
effects if you're doing something, if you get really cool, like, "Hey, I can actually trigger effects while I'm doing something
Yes.
to pop on the screen
Yeah.
and do interesting things with the backgrounds and even have, like, a video running and kinda work with a video inside a video." There's a lot of cool tools and with AI, and there's all musicians, like, we look at what tools there are. As
Yeah.
sampling came, we use samples, and we're using DAWs, we're using all kinds of digital capabilities, and we use AI when it makes sense. Like, I play, so I don't use
Yeah.
AI to play because I know how to play. But there are tools I can use for AI to help me out with my sound engineering, to set my
Yeah.
settings up so that when I get there, my settings is there. And that's kinda cool because, like, that's one of the things that when you're trying to set up to get your mic settings and your effect settings right and have them all pre there, it's kinda like you have this AI assistant that's setting it all up. And, anybody that does, like, film or musicians, like, we start to mix theater and performance. And so we have to have usually you have to have a human being running all that. But nowadays, now you can have these other tools helping you do that. So your overall performance, your theatrics can be controlled more, like it gives you an opportunity that you gotta be 2 people or 1 person and have a lot of things going on, or it would took like 5 people to do it.
I agree with you 100%. And I would like to take all of what you said and implant it into all the comedians so they have an understanding. Like they have the power and capability to do all these same things that you and other musicians have been doing all along to enhance their performance. That we wouldn't have been able to do in person in a club, but we can most certainly do and apply all of those same ideas that you're doing online. I think that's really smart. And I love that messaging of it because there's so many tools available. And now it's like, oh, yeah, you don't have someone in the booth. You don't have, someone else setting these things up. Now it's on you. Go for it, play, take on that mindset and enjoy it. I think that's really cool.
But then
See, you're like,
it's like
you're my
world
people.
yeah. Well, it's like world building. If you think about you when I've talked to authors, right? And authors, when they build their fictional stories. They build these worlds. They do the character design, then they build the world, they build the city, they build the neighborhood, they build like the scene, and they're total control of that. And when I'm a musician, I've always told people like other artists is like you're in control of that world building. Like you create your persona, you create your kind of the stagecraft. Like if you think about like a guy like Freddie Mercury, when he was on stage, he had that persona. That's not him every day, but that was how he presented himself. It's the theatrics of Bowie. Bowie presented himself. Prince presented himself. Michael Jackson. They present them. Lady Gaga. They learn how to use theatrics to present this other person that is them, but it's their performance self. And it
Right.
becomes like they can own that stage. They can own that world and bring you into it. And I think, comedians can do that. All
Mm.
artists can do that. You can bring people into that world, the way you talk, the way you tell the story, the way you tell the joke, the way you set it up. You can, and then with all these other tools, you can make it even bigger,
Yeah.
that world.
Yes. Absolutely. I love that. I like how you're also like super innovative with your music and experimenting with different things and looking at some of the things that you've done and posted is fascinating because you're open to the experimentation of it whereas a lot of people get stuck in it being um it has to be, this and fit in a box and stuff, and they don't give themselves that freedom to explore and do something different and unique onto themselves, and I think that's just really cool, and the fact that you're incorporating all the technology that's available to you to continue evolving and everything. I'm just a big fan of artists in general who do that. Why not? Why not?
Well, when I first started, I was like, I did not ever, I never sang until 2016. And when I came on the scene with the Ghost, the first thing I did is I didn't like my male voice. So I went and I created a character named Josephine Electric. And then she's a ghost. And the whole band, El Fam Electric Ghost, is the idea of my band is a bunch of ghosts create a band and people don't know they're actually ghosts. They think they're just people playing, have an act. It's kind of like the Gorillas like
Uh-huh.
concept. So it's a whole band full of ghosts. And when I actually played, I would actually be in this kind of phantom mask, LED mask, and you couldn't tell who I was because I was a ghost. So I could do this female voice through this technology that actually shifts my voice in real time. So I created this character called Josephine Electric, and she's like the lead singer. And I'd be wearing this phantom mask and this LED kind of hoodie, and you couldn't tell if I was a man or a woman. And I could sing songs, and I could switch between male voices and female voices in my songs, and that's what I do. And it was really interesting that I did this in New York in a hip hop crowd. They didn't know how they were going to take it, but they couldn't really tell if I was a guy or a girl because I was in this mask and everything. So I was able to do it, and people dug it. And then I had other producers come up to me and say, "What do you do? How do you do that?" And it was interesting because you could be scared going into that environment because it's very macho, and I didn't know how they were going to take Josephine, that voice, and they didn't react to it in a bad way. I was very surprised because I guess what I found out is they had masks on too, that their ultra macho images they had, they weren't really who they looked like they were portraying. They were artists, they were musicians, and they were just putting on an act. And I was like, wow, these guys are putting on an act too.
Ah, right? Interesting way of seeing it too. It's true because we have stage personas, right? Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, it's just
very
like people,
cool.
the whole stage thing is like some people are like, well, that must be who they are. It's like, no, not a lot of times these guys are not who you think they are.
No, no, that's very true. That is very true, right? Yeah. And then a lot of times
Yeah,
people expect comedians to be on all the time, but when
yeah,
they're not on stage, there are so many they barely there's very introverted comedians and people who are not outgoing or don't have big personalities off stage at all. So, yeah, I'm not surprised, but that's a really cool story that you have on how that really, shows the truth of that, just the truth behind it and people's personas.
yeah. It's just what people don't realize is like, Like a lot of times, like you get on that stage and people think like, oh, I'm going to be like Mick Jagger all day. Well, Mick Jagger's like a business guy. If you ever deal with Mick Jagger, like after, when he's not on stage prancing like he does, right? He's like this Victorian British businessman. They talk very logically and makes a lot of sense. He's like they're not some kind of crazy hippie rock star. Like he's
Right.
very kind of tied down, and you're like, wow. So that the image he has on stage is not exact at all what he is
Yeah.
in his daily life. And I think what I find with artists is that that's always the case. A lot of times they're very shy until they get
Yes.
on stage. And then when you ask them after the performance, they don't even remember what they did because they were kind of like in a trance and they have this persona they get into. And then after that's not them anymore. It's like, and people get the wrong idea because they think, oh, I'm always on. I'm that person. I'm doing that. But you're not most of the time, unless
Yeah.
you're like really taking it to heart like a method actor. Then you might get stuck in it.
This is true. Yeah. Right. And there are those people. I just recently read some autobiographies of celebrities who were like, oh, method acting messed me up. It's so true. Yeah.
Like Andy
Um,
Kaufman, he was kind of known for taking it off the stage and being that all
yeah.
day. And you're like, yeah,
Yeah.
he's like, yo, okay. I don't know. And even Bowie was known when he was Ziggy Stardust. He actually couldn't get out of Ziggy Stardust when he did it. He would actually stay as Ziggy off the stage. And then he really realized that wasn't good for him to do that. He probably shouldn't do that, but he did.
Yeah.
But
That
sometimes it
would be
happens.
exhausting and hard and confusing. Yeah. So,
Yeah,
and that,
yeah. Just sometimes you get very wise.
it's kind of interesting too. In this conversation, it kind of made me think, even in business in a way and entrepreneurship, um, when we go out, we're not on stage, but there are these places and networking events where people kind of tend to put on their performance, like a persona of who they want to portray themselves to be as a person in business. And then
Mhm.
you see them somewhere else and they're just not that's not at all who
Yeah,
they
it's
are.
not. It's like that's their stage self. That's the stage self.
Right.
Yeah, yeah, because they like
So even
it's always extra, extra.
it
It's
really
like
is. Sometimes there's a lot of hype and there's not a
yeah.
lot of substance behind there.
Well, it's like a salesman, like my dad was a salesman and he would put it on. And then he'd get home and he'd be like worn out. And he's like, because I've been putting on this thing to be a sales guy, you gotta have that exuberance. You gotta make people excited. So you gotta be like you're on. And then he'd get home and he'd be like tapped out. And I gotta understand it. Like, yeah, because like you're tapped out, kind of like a musician come back off the stage, like I'm tapped. I just gave all this energy and now I don't have it anymore, because I
So
just gave it away.
it's so true, and I see that a lot, and even after, things reopened after the pandemic and we start to go back out into real life, there's a similar, thing. I hear a lot of people saying, "Wow, it's really exhausting going out and putting it," but I think that's also a recognition of how maybe we all have a little bit of performer in us, right?
Yeah,
Like, it's
I
like,
think we
"Wow, it's
all
really
do.
nice to be around people."
Yeah,
Yeah.
because you when you go to work and you're in that cubicle, you gotta put on that self that's, like, tied to the cubicle state, right? So you've gotta be kinda
Yeah.
buttoned down, and you might not be a buttoned down person, right? But in order to be in that world, you gotta be buttoned down for that time that you're there, and then later
That's
you
right,
go
you
back
can't
and
have your
and
pajamas
then
on.
yeah, I mean, you can't be, like, in your daily life, you wanna be a skydiver, you wanna be out mountain biking, jumping off cliffs, and, like, you can't do that in the cube. So you can only
Right.
do so much of that. It's like you're kind of tied, tapped down. It's like, well, you can't go that crazy there here. Like you're in this environment. So you kind of keep it down. you know.
It's true. Well, and the other interesting thing on this same thread of performance, I think it's also carried out into so we kinda took it from, like, performers into everyday life, but that everyday life then even extends into this performer or persona that people put on social media, right?
Oh
Because then
yeah,
it's like, "Oh, I
yeah,
have to
the
put out
influencer.
this story."
Yeah, the
It's like, "Oh,
influencer. the influencer that's got to get 1 million views, and then you get addicted to get like whatever 10,000, 100,000, and if you don't get it, then you get depressed because like, oh, I got to fix something. I got to create a new version of myself to click the algorithm, and you're fighting for the views. My whole point is like, just because they got a million views, does that mean it's good? Doesn't mean it's good. Just means that you triggered the algorithm. Because like, how many
Right?
cat videos are out there? It's like, are those all good? Are those all really like? I mean, I love cats. I got a cat, but it's like, is that really what
Yeah.
I should spend all my time just watching the cats? Or is there
Right.
something that's a little deeper? Like maybe there's a documentary on lead belly. Maybe there's a documentary on the history of you know, bebop jazz. Or am I going to watch 10,000 cat videos? Maybe it's
Right.
okay. I just want cat videos.
Maybe that's what everybody's doing these days. They post they're doing all these things, but really they're at home watching cat videos. So
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. It's
I think
like
oh, sorry. I think that's also kind of brings it back to like what we're saying about, as a performer and getting that energy and that vibe from other people, how we can get in the zone and doing things like watching, like if I doom scroll, I call it doom scrolling, and I get caught in that circle, I get in this zone, and all of a sudden I look up and like an hour has passed. I'm like, what happened to that? Right? We get in the zone.
yeah.
But I think
What was
like
I doing?
that's right? And that's another reason why, like, I think it's important that there's more opportunity for people to see things live in real time, and that, like podcast right now, people are watching us live in real time, and I think there's, uh there's something special about that we're in the now, we don't get lost into things,
Yeah,
a
yeah,
photo album, things or something like that, but I think there's something special and there's a connection even though it is online that we seek out, and there's a value to having the live performance of things and the live interaction in some format or another where people can it's reciprocal, you know?
yeah. Well, it's like that human communication. If you get something that's more like an infomercial. And I've been a big being a producer. My whole thing is about authenticity, being in the present, and accepting happy accidents, or that there are no bad notes. And that's a hard thing for some guys to get into because you can get into it. And I've told them, like, there's a story. If you want to talk about perfection, like Miles Davis, one of the greatest jazz, innovators ever, right? He was working with Herbie Hancock. Herbie Hancock hit the wrong note. He didn't stop the performance. He adjusted the song to match Herbie's chords. And Herbie said he learned from that I thought Miles was going to kill him. He thought Miles Davis was going to kill him for hitting the wrong note. And then Miles told him, like, no, you gave me an opportunity. He said, what do you mean? It's like, that I can take the song in a different direction. That's what we do. We're
Yes.
fusion bebop artists. We take the present moment. You're like, you can live in the present. There's no bad notes. What you do is you learn how to recover from what you perceive to be a mistake, and you look at it as an opportunity. And that's why I've
Yes.
always live podcasted, because I don't want to be stuck in some scripted, edited, and I'm able to do so many episodes because I don't get crazy about editing each one. I let them
Yeah.
be what they are. That means I
I
can do
love
more.
that.
If I was
You're
editing, I couldn't do as many.
Yeah, you're right though, and that's what, improv comedy is all about. It's like being in the moment, and our job is as improvisers, our instructors would always tell us and our coaches would say, a job of an improviser is to make your scene partner look like a genius and a poet and brilliant. Not to make me look that way, but to make our partners look that way, and I love your story about, Miles and Herbie Hancock because that's exactly what Miles did. He's like, "I'm gonna drop my idea and I'm gonna support my person here," and that's what art is, and I think that's what makes art even better. So in improv, what makes it good and funny and keeps people coming back is that the actors in it are willing to give up their own idea to support their scene partner, and that's what made me fall in love with it. It's like, oh, teamwork makes the dream work, but
Yeah,
really that's what happens on stage is that we support one another, we make each other look brilliant, and those happy accidents gives us opportunity to make something genius, and I think that's incredible, and that even goes to, like, innovation to, how you were saying when you were having all the bands come in and set up, do the tech rehearsals, right? And how I want comedians come in and do the tech rehearsals. We wanted to get going, but if you can't get it going in a tech rehearsal, you better be ready to improvise and make it brilliant and roll with it when things
Yeah,
go
just roll with
wrong.
it. Yeah, you just come
That
up with
was
another idea. I mean, that's the whole thing what I love about, like, punk aesthetic and, fusion jazz is, like, you
yeah,
don't if you get with a group and you're playing with all these guys or people, and like, you don't start and stop. You kinda take the
yeah,
piece and it evolves, and every night that you play that piece, it evolves into something different, and you don't spend all the time trying to make it be, exact. You kinda like, you're living in the moment, like, that room has a sound so we can take advantage of it. We're feeling a certain way, so the bass player goes off in a way, and I follow them, and they follow me, or I follow the drummer. It's like you just do what the moment calls for, and you don't
yeah,
worry about it. And I've ran into musicians that are like, "Well, what's the key change?" It's like, you gotta feel it. I can't tell you. Like it's gonna be nonverbal. You're gonna have to hear it."
yeah.
And there were guys who are more from a classical background and they're reading sheet music. They had a hard time. And I thought because they're such a good musician, because they were classical, that they could do it. But they were so locked into the sheet that they couldn't handle kind of improvisation. And I was so shocked the fact that they had the technical skills, but they didn't believe enough in themselves to know what the next note should be when something was written down to tell them what it should be. And I'm like,
Wow.
that's really interesting because I wouldn't have thought they would be limited that way, but they were.
Yeah, and it's funny, to your point on that is in improv, people would always be like, "Well, if it's improvised and you're making it up on the spot, what are you practicing?" And to like what you said, even though you're doing a lot of improvised music, you still have to practice as a musician, and I think, like, that is what built your confidence as a musician that you could improvise, whereas the people who are constantly practicing only with the sheet music, they didn't have the skills or practice mentality to do it without. The more you do something, the better you become at it. So the fact that's really cool. And so people would always laugh, like, "Why are you practicing improv? How do you do that?" That's how you do that.
Well, you can have a bass structure. I mean, every jazz song has a
Yeah,
bass structure, and then
yeah,
we can kinda go off and then come back, and we call it, like, you can go into cacophony or discordance and then come out of it.
yeah,
You go into
yep,
something a little off tune and you come back to it because you have themes, and we know our
yes.
themes, but
Same with improv.
we can move back and we have these set things, so it's not like we didn't practice, but we do have a lot more there's a lot more of the song that's not set. There's, like,
Yeah,
parts of the song are set and the other parts aren't. And you can
yep,
kinda go and it's movable. Even the set parts could change the length. Yeah, I could decide I'm not gonna do it and cue somebody to switch to something else. And then we immediately like we did 4 minutes last night of this thing, and then we only do 2, or we do 1 and jump to something else. Like, it's just what we felt like doing. And that is like a little bit of chaos, and some people don't like that because they wanna know what it's gonna be. But the thing about life is sometimes you don't know what it's gonna be, so why don't you embrace it?
yeah, exactly, exactly, and that's like improv. We also have structures, and there's different formats we could use. We could be like, "Oh, we're doing a herald," or, "Oh, we're doing this," or, "Oh, we're doing that," and but it's similar to what you're saying, you have certain song structures you can always go back to, but you can play and expand. Once you know the rules, you can break the rules,
Yeah, that's the
and then
key.
there's practice, yeah, and then you practice how you break those rules.
Yeah, a lot of guys that go to Berkeley, the professors will tell them, it's like, "You learned all the music composition rules, now when you leave, break them." Because
Yes,
if you go and remember all the greats from the Morrison and Joplin and Hendrix and, Dylan, they broke the rules. They
yeah,
went and did, like, Dylan was famous being a folk guy, and then suddenly he went electric, and all the folk purists said, "Well, you're what are you doing?" He said, "Well, I'm going a new direction." And it's like
mhm,
the people who are willing, Hendrix did feedback. They said, we can't put that on record. That's not allowed on record. And he said, it's going on the record. And it's like people who push it on that bleeding edge because they don't care about like what was in the canon. We're going to adjust the canon, you know?
yep. Yeah. I think that's for me the exciting part of doing art is it's never done. It's constantly evolving and changing and moving and playing in it. And I think even as the world evolves with technology, there's so much opportunity to use those tools in experiment and learn like kind of learn a new set of rules and formats, and then how do we break them as artists, and how do we make it and put that human element into it, and do it that way. I don't know, all of this is very exciting to me on so many
Yeah,
levels, you know?
it is a brave new world, there's a lot of things you can do, and I'm very cross genre, and I kinda called it expansive. Like, what I call my music is expansive sound. People are like, "Oh, I wanna pin" A&R guys like, "What's that mean?" It means I do multiple genres. It's like, "Well, I'll pin you to a genre." I say, "Well, you could say it's like progressive rock or new wave, but it's really not because I do fusion jazz, I do country, I do punk, I do rock, I do soul, I do it like all of it. So that's why I call it expansive because I can cross into
Yeah,
multiple genres because that's what I feel like doing. And now the marketing people hate it because they're like I want to know
yeah,
it's new wave, I want to know it's EDM, it's trap. They want to put you in a box. But it's like I say, well, if I put it out independently, I just put it out there. I find there are people all over the world that will dig it. And so then I
yep,
get into more independent distribution because these other guys want to put me in a channel and then they don't, then they wonder why it doesn't work because I don't fit in that channel.
right,
you know,
yep, that's really
so you kind of
cool.
get,
That's exciting.
you gotta know what you can do, Don't be stuck. Don't be stuck by people's labels to kind of create your own label, create your own brand.
I agree. I agree. Be your own person. That's what everybody
Well,
is learning to do these days of like, "Be my authentic self, but I wanna be this." It's like, "Just be
yeah,
you." Just do
yeah, it's hard.
you.
Like once you put it in the world, like you put plausible into the world, and I already see like, wow, there's like musicians could use that. You said podcasters could use. There's a lot of people doing one act plays could do it. You could have a lot of different types of artists come on to that platform, and it's got some really cool features that I picked up on as a musician. It's like, wow, yeah, the interactive audience, that's really key. I can see a lot of
Yeah,
bands like, wow, yeah, that's what I need. That's the mojo that I need. That's what I want. So I think, yeah, there's ways to expand things. And when you talk to people, then you find out like, oh, I could go into this market. I could go into this because if you don't talk to them, then you don't know. If you don't put it out there,
yep,
then you don't know. Because you talk to me now, I know
that's
about
right.
Plauzzable. And I say, hey,
Yeah,
people ought to check
and
it out.
absolutely, and, it's a work in progress, and it will evolve, and it will change, and so, like, when you go in there, we're very niche and focused on comedians and onboarding comedians, but I'm not it doesn't trust me, it's not lost on me that this could be used for poets and spoken word and storytellers and musicians and things of that nature. And as we grow and people come and they experiment and we play, it evolves and grows with us and we do it together. And so, yeah, I'd love to have you come on and check it out and let's keep the
All right,
conversation going,
definitely.
you know?
Yeah, definitely. We'll talk to you about doing like a family to ghost performance, like even my music, just to check it out, and then maybe expanding my Peg Bedroom Producer Festival where I bring in all these bands. But that's just something for the future. But I do
Yeah.
have another podcast. We've gone longer than I wanted to, but I was talking so much with you. I enjoyed it. I want to let people know that we're going to be out there on all the podcast platforms that you can listen or watch podcast on by tomorrow. And thank you again for being on the show. Check out plauzzable.com. That's clickable. When we're published, you can go right through it and get to it. But
Thank
thank
you
you
so
again for
much.
being on the
Such a
show.
great conversation with you. I enjoyed it.
Okay, yeah, I'm waiting for it to end. I think it's almost done.
Okay. Yeah, we went a little long, so
It's okay. It's just like the computer's taking a little bit to end it. I don't know why, but
do you want me to go ahead and